Hello and welcome here again to the World Crypto Network. Today, with the first show of hopefully many of this new show called Read Rothbard and Use Bitcoin. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Rothbard, Austrian economics, and Bitcoin. It's a nice combination of the two things. Today, to start off to the fantastic topic of education, I'm going to read to you from Rothbard's book, Education Free and Compulsory, on page 2. So this is quite early. The entire process of growing up, of developing all the facets of a man's personality, is his education. It is obvious that a person acquires this education in all activities of his childhood. All his waking hours are spent in learning in one form or another. It is clearly absurd to limit the term education to a person's formal schooling. He is learning all the time. He learns and forms ideas about other people, their desires and actions to achieve them, the world and the natural laws that govern it, and his own ends and how to achieve them. He formulates ideas on the nature of man and what his own and others' ends should be in line of this nature. This is a continual process, and it is obvious that formal schooling constitutes only an item in this process. And that is absolutely right. Formal schooling is, of course, not everything. And how you can get educated, how you can get schooled, both in Austrian economics and in Bitcoin, is exactly what we're going to talk here today. So to introduce the panel, we have an amazing panel. First, we got, of course, Jimmy Song joining us today. How are you doing, Jim?
I'm great. Glad to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, fantastic. We also got Blake Anderson. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me on the panel. I really appreciate it.
And we got Niko. What's up?
Thank you, Max, and thanks for the invite. It's a great pleasure and honor to be there.
So as always, we do have a topic in mind, but we want to keep it free-flowing and interesting. So if you have any new things to talk about, please put them in the chat. If you have any questions that you would like the panelists to answer, the chat is the place to be, and just have fun and join the conversation. So to start off, of course, we are all Bitcoiners, right? I think all on the panel are Bitcoin maximalists. And the cool thing is that Bitcoin is a unique thing that does not have any formal university, that does not have any, institution that you go to on your education. It's a fall down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. It really is. And so my question to you, Jimmy, is, first of all, who taught you, who guided you through this journey down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and how did you learn from them?
Well, I wouldn't say there was anything formal, and this is the thing about Bitcoin and motivated students is that you don't necessarily have a mentor. The whole concept of a mentor or somebody that sort of forces you to learn certain things that maybe you don't want to learn. I think the archetype that we have is of the old style kung fu movies, right? Like where there's a guy that teaches for like 20 years and then like you come out and you're like this kung fu master and you can do all this stuff. That's not how the real world works, especially in a free society. What you tend to do is to go towards your interests. And if you're interested in something, then you go and learn as much as you can about it. And that's exactly what I did. I started with an article on Slashdot. I Googled it like most people do when they find a topic that's of interest to them. And I found some resources. There wasn't that many when I started. It was like 2011. And really, most of it was just, hey, here's what Bitcoin is, and here are the properties of it. And that's what got me hooked. Later on, there were more resources. And when I started coding, especially in 2013, there were people that helped me out. I was working on an open source project called Colored Coins. And back then, there was a guy that helped me learn a lot of that stuff. But mostly, he would just be like, hey, it was first of all over email and over like chat or IRC or whatever. And he'd be like, hey, can you implement HD wallets? I'm like, what's an HD wallet? And he'd be like, oh, here's the specification. Can you implement it for this thing? I'm like, I guess so. And I would go and learn all about it and try to get the test vectors to pass in my code and stuff like that. I mean, this is the way of the autodidact, right? Like, and this is something that Naval Ravikant likes to talk about. It's not information that's rare anymore. It used to be that there were a lot of rent seekers that would gatekeep the information, and you would have to pay them money in order to get access to it. It's not really that way anymore, especially in technology. What's actually rare are people that are willing to go and look at that stuff and learn it and be motivated enough to do it. I read something a while back. I think it was like Stack Overflow survey or something, or actually, I don't think it was Stack Overflow. It was a company that had interviewed tons and tons of engineers, and they were trying to figure out, okay, how do we separate noise from signal? And they gave their candidates like all sorts of questionnaires and tried to figure out who worked out the best and stuff. And they found out that by far the best signal isn't an Ivy League education, right? It isn't graduating from Harvard. It isn't, doing X, Y, or Z. The biggest indicator that they found that of high quality developers was actually people that took online classes on their own and finished them. Like those two things, if you actually start the class and finish, that's a better indicator of your development ability than anything else. And that's the first thing that you need as a developer, is this curiosity. And if you don't have that, and if it's just sort of being forced on you, like the education system that we have today, it's not going to really work. And that's definitely what I found, and that's how I learned about Bitcoin and a lot of other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just talked about this before the call, how important it is that by now information is completely and utterly non-scarce in this non-scarce network of the internet, where you can share ideas at no cost with each other, and anyone who wants to can have a copy. That is fantastic, because now we took away the power and the monopoly on information that was held back by the institutions, by the old universities. You no longer have to go to a library to read a book. You use your phone. So Blake, what do you say about now the issue, or not the issue, but the advancement in technology that gives us this spread out world of non-scarce good and information? And how did you acquire all the knowledge and understanding that you have in Bitcoin?
Well, Jimmy's probably heard me say this a million times, but I always like to reiterate that in the age of information isn't the scarce resource, attention is. And that really gives a lot of credence to what he said in terms of what's a good indicator of somebody that's going to be a talented developer, somebody that was able to, on their own, filter out all of the excess noise and information to be able to find a class that's relevant and to be able to complete that class. That's a lot better than having your teacher standing there and shouting at you, hey, wake up, you need to do this. That's one way to learn, but a much more challenging way to learn is to motivate yourself to do these things. And one of the best things that I learned was basically the birthplace of motivation. The birthplace of motivation is autonomy, purpose, and mastery. People that have those things are motivated to continue and to go and research towards those things. There was a study done at MIT where they gave cash prizes for different things. And when the cash prize was for a physical competition, it worked really good as a motivator. It's the classic motivation scheme that you've seen play out in many movies. But when the task needed even rudimentary critical thinking skills, a high reward actually made people stressed out, and sometimes they would get a worse result. And they were saying, this is weird. This is almost kind of socialist. How can we discover what's motivating people if it's not purely financial? Well, once people have enough money on the table where it takes the issue of having money off the table, after that, autonomy, mastery, and purpose are really what motivate people. So I think that Jimmy really hit the nail on the head when he said that autodidactism and being a self-motivated person to go out and to find these things out really helps. And in terms of what you need to learn to get into Bitcoin, it's a very multidisciplinary type of thing to understand. You almost need to have a polymathic understanding of several different fields. The security and compensation metrics of Bitcoin are very closely tied with sociology, and you really need to learn a lot about sociology, economics, and coding to really understand all of the overlapping circles that make you a really good Bitcoin contributor, in my opinion. So I think that what helped me learn the most was looking at things that I was interested in, and then trying to tie them back into Bitcoin, and then seeing where my shortcomings were, and then trying to use my interests to explore in that direction. And a lot of the MIT OCW OpenCourseWare videos on YouTube and doing those courses were very, very helpful to me in terms of where do I find really good signal to noise ratio educational content to figure these things out. And I think that those types of sources of information are very, very useful. It's very exciting to be able to have the amount of information resources that we have in this day and age, because historically the people that were reading and stuff like that, Rothbard was brilliant, he was a genius, but we have the benefit of access to so much more information that he did, that we really have an opportunity to have an impact on history, and that's very exciting to me.
Well, you're absolutely right, Blake. Rothbard was a genius, but I would doubt that we have the power to gather more information that he did. I was at his personal library at the Mises Institute. They have all his books with his handwritten notes and stuff. It's so incredibly many books that are in that library. It's mind-blowing. That guy read 24/7 pretty much. I have no idea how he did it. But you're right.
We have so much more noise too, though. You're right. Trying to filter out that noise is such a huge hurdle, whereas he had so many books that were. So I think that's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective before you said that.
Oh yeah, nice thing to add there. Absolutely. So Niko, what are your thoughts so far? How do you value the open access to information, and how was your journey down the Bitcoin rabbit hole?
Yeah, I enjoy the point you made so far. And I do think motivation is key here. I mean, it should go without saying that if you don't want to learn something, you will never learn it. And I feel like this we have this university world that maybe died like 20 years ago, the absolute latest. And we are preparing people for the world that doesn't exist anymore, essentially, with the existing education system. And we have the University of Internet already. The key, however, is to drown out the noise, which there's a lot of it. And in that, I think making helpful videos like this, like what all of us are doing, is contributing and trying to kind of like drown out a little bit of the noisy or maybe ICO stuff and scammy stuff. And I do think the best way is to lead by example. And you should always listen to everybody. I mean, listen to the scammers. You can learn a lot from them, but follow nobody and make up your own mind. And I think that's the kind of like personal responsibility that also Bitcoin greatly facilitates. And it does bring you, like somebody mentioned, the financial freedom and what that brings to the game. And it changes the motivation completely once you don't have to work for your food and to providing for your family. So that, that leads to compromises normally and unhappiness. And once you find let's say you use Bitcoin to find the financial independence, that will free up a lot of brain juice to actually put into something and building something. So they're definitely great. And I have high respect for Jimmy Song, because you are talking the talk and walking the walk and educating these new coders. And by the way, teaching is absolutely the best way to learn. Like if you just listen to somebody, you can try to internalize that and talk to yourself. But if you talk to somebody, if you teach that thing that you just learned to somebody, you'll instantly be committed in the memory. And that's in my experience, the best way to learn. And how did I get into the scene? I'll just share a funny anecdote. I actually got into, I got schooled about Bitcoin by my mom in 2010, which is, I don't think many can say. That was a weird thing. At that time, of course, we didn't understand what it was. It was more like this funny internet monopoly money or whatever, a nerdy project, like I think most of people thought at that time. I even mined for a while, but then I graduated from school. I became a construction engineer. And life kind of took over, and it took me quite a few years. I just got back like about maybe 2 years ago, 1 year ago, like full time. So now all I do is try to talk to people about it. Once I got it, I'm consumed with the idea of spreading this information and getting as many people on board as possible. And that's why I'm making content that is also I'm trying to appeal not necessarily to the lowest common denominator, but to the vast majority of people who are not technically super inclined. And I try to provide something in the middle ground, like not super technical, but also something interesting and entertaining. And yeah, kudos Jimmy for upping your production quality. It's really nice. The quality of the camera and the sound is really crisp. That's all I gotta say about that.
Yeah, great stuff. And of course, we talked about how to gather information, that it's no longer that big of an issue. Just DuckDuckGo it, because you shouldn't use Google. But of course, information is only one step. What you then have to do, if you have that information, is internally try to understand it. Of course, you do that with your mind, your heart, and your gut, right? It's a holistic process. So, Jimmy, what specifically helped you really understanding such a complex topic after you gathered all the information?
Well, I mean, it's going to be different for everybody. And I don't pretend to know the pathway to understanding Bitcoin. I'm still not sure that I really understand it, right? Like there are aspects of Bitcoin that are very, that we're still discovering. Like the whole anti-fragility thing kind of hit me by surprise quite a bit, because I didn't expect Bitcoin to react the way it did to SegWit 2x and all this other stuff. And we're learning more about the world and how it works because of this experiment, and that's a really good thing. We're not just learning individually, we're learning as a community. That said, there's a lot of stuff that you can learn just by, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the insights that I have come while I'm sleeping, and like the next day I'll just sort of, it'll have like marinated in there or something like that, and it's ready to fully cook. Oftentimes, you'll just sort of hear a story and you don't really know the meaning of it until later. I don't know if you've had this experience where, you'll read a story about something and you don't realize the significance until like the next day. You're like, oh, wow. And then you're telling somebody about it. And, this relates back to like how teaching is a great way to learn something. When you're telling somebody about it and you're like, oh, wow, that's actually way more significant than I thought. And that actually ends up giving you a perspective on the topic. So yeah, as far as actually learning, I think teaching is a really great way. Writing articles, explaining it to people. This is how we're built, right? Like we're social animals. We need to talk to people in order to really grasp something. I forget. I think it was Montaigne or Voltaire or one of those like guys in the past that said that like the art of essay writing is actually like crystallizing your thoughts. It changes your thoughts by being forced to write it. And for me, that's what teaching is. It's being forced to explain something in a way that people can really grasp and is actionable. That's a really good way to get people to understand it, and for me to understand it, more importantly. And I get a lot more out of a lot of the material that I've created than probably anybody else. I've taught like 20 of these seminars, and now I know the material backwards and forwards. But in many ways, like if you ask me about a lot of these topics, like before I started, I wouldn't have known it at least at the depth that I did. And for certain topics like SegWit, I really didn't. As I started teaching it, I realized I really don't understand this stuff, and I'm starting to. And I released a library thing this morning called SKYPE, and that's based off of some of the libraries that I wrote in the class. But turns out that it's a particular mirror of the elliptic curve that's used for Bitcoin. Greg Maxwell tells me it's really useful for bulletproofs, and so there's Christopher Allen and Mark Friedenbach and stuff. Now, I don't understand bulletproofs at all. Like, I don't understand how they work. They've described it to me. They're like, it's a Merkle tree utilizing point addition over the mirror curve and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, I don't know what any of what you just said didn't make any sense to me, right? Like, and this happens to me a lot when I talk to people like Greg Maxwell or whatever. It's like, you just said a sentence and there's probably like, I understand 10% of it, but that 10% was really, really valuable. I really wish I could understand the other 90% of it. And that's what, like creating this material is like for me oftentimes, is that I just need to go and, parse what they mean, or try to understand what they mean and go through it step by step. It's very humbling oftentimes, because I like to think of myself as a smart person that can get it. But oftentimes I have to read the material like 3-4 times before I really understand it. And it's only like going through it so many times with repetition that I really get it. And I've heard this about, people that have accomplished a lot. They're not necessarily the quickest people in the world, but they are very persistent, right? And they try to learn, and they don't give up until they've actually fully learned it. And that for me is the key to really mastering a topic. It isn't just about, oh, I got it once and that's enough. There's a depth to most material. Like especially stuff like Austrian economics, like that you guys know about. There's a real depth to stuff. Like I was talking to Safedine and Bitstein yesterday, just about like business and how to make money off of being kind of a YouTube person, or like being Bitcoin famous or whatever. And as we were talking about it, realized like, there's short time orientation, long time orientation, low time preference, high time preference, some stuff that those guys know really, really well. But I was noticing that in some of their behavior that they were, with a low type preference, or they had a high type preference or a short time orientation in some of that. And I'm like, wait, but you teach this stuff. How are you not like practicing it? Well, it's because there's a depth to that material, right? Like there's a profundity to it. And it takes a really long time to really absorb it and recognize where it applies to your life. And that's, I don't know, I guess I'm getting a little more philosophical here, but that's how, how you really get it to be a part of you, right? Like I love the word investment. And this is something that I tell people all the time about Bitcoin, is that it really should be an investment and not gambling. For a lot of people, it's just gambling, right? Like they just put money in this or that or whatever and just hope that it goes up. They don't really understand it. Investment is an old word, and it comes from like a French word, vestments, right? Or old. I think it's an old English word actually. Vestments. It's a vest, right? Like something that you put on yourself, something that you wear. That's a part of you. That's what investment should be. You should know it so well that it becomes a part of you. It becomes something that's inside you almost. That's a part of your character. That's what Bitcoin should be in order for you to actually put money on it. Instead, what people like to do in a fiat money system is gamble with it, because it's it's not going to keep its value. It's not worthy of being included as a part of you, if you will, because it value is extracted from you. People can take it away at any time, and all these other things. Whereas with sound money, like it is worth making a part of you, because it's actually going to last, and it's something that doesn't change, and you can really understand it at a deep level. So a lot of things there. Hopefully you guys got something out of it, but my general philosophy in learning something is to really understand it and go over the material over and over again. It might be partly like OCD or something like that, but from in a learning context, that actually turns out to be a good thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there, Jimmy. Fantastic stuff. And especially that understanding something is really repetition, right? And immersing yourself in the subject. And if you start living Bitcoin, breathing Bitcoin, eating Bitcoin 24/7, eventually you're going to get a glimpse of what it really is. But I do agree that I don't think there's anyone in this world that really understands Bitcoin, because it's such an incredible complex topic, right? And every day I have like another mind-blowing experience. We're like, oh wow, that is how that works. That is fantastic. That is so smart. Even as trivial as stuff like the difficulty adjustment, which you just think, yeah, limits the supply, right? Kind of nice. Oh no, the difficulty adjustment is fantastic and so rich. We could do another an entire 10-hour show just talking about that and all the intricacies of how this works, that with more miners producing more miners adding hash rate, that not more Bitcoin are created, but rather that the security is being increased, which creates this beautiful symbiosis of increase in value and increase in security, which further increases value. So fantastic stuff. Blake, Jimmy talked about a lot of there, so just pick up wherever you want to, but especially how you manage this fall down the rabbit hole and how you try to understand this convoluted subject.
Well, definitely. Well, Jimmy was talking about what people said a long time ago, so I want to jump in on that a little bit. What Einstein said a long time ago is that he's not necessarily smart, that he spends a lot more time with a topic or with a subject than most other people care to. And I think that really helps people kind of to start to understand how the brain works. Your synapses, when they connect together and you have a thought process, the first time that you have it, the first time that you've traversed those synapses to make that path, it's kind of like a deer trail through the forest. But if you traverse that path over and over and over and over, it becomes a superhighway in your mind, and it really, really, really gets coded into what you know and what you understand. And your brain has this certain element of neurological plasticity, and it's said that you get the most out of it when you expand in both directions, because you have basically two brains in your head. You have your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere. One is good with the micro, one's good with the macro, one's emotional, one's more linear. One helps you get traction, the other one helps you explore and go out creatively. And when you're talking to somebody and you're teaching them, or when you're writing something down, or when you're doing a podcast, what happens is the information traverses the corpus callosum, or the hard bundle of nerves between your two hemispheres. And then you get that plasticity where it can grow in both directions, because you're getting a real micro sense of what's happening, and then a real macro sense of how do I get creative with this, and how do I expand into new creative territory and really grow through this. So sticking with something a lot, like Jimmy is with his class, because he teaches the class over and over, and then also communicating it to other people, where you're traversing the corpus callosum, and then these freeways are not just being built in one city, but cities in both hemispheres of both of the brains that are in your skull. That's an extremely powerful way to become smarter. It's one of the reasons that pair programming is so valuable, because when you're talking to somebody else, when you have a sounding board, the information that you're taking on is traversing the corpus callosum, which then makes it available to your creative centers and not just your logical linear centers, which are going to be naturally a little bit better at mathematical programming and logic and binary thought and things like that. And it really is extremely important to talk to people about these things. And that's another thing that the internet and the age of information really helps us do, is to find our tribe. Joe Rogan has these jokes about, oh, I go out and I'm not that smart, yet somehow I'm way smarter than almost everybody I meet. And that doesn't make me feel good. It makes me feel kind of horrified. And sometimes you get to feel that way until you go to a Bitcoin conference and there's somebody like Greg Maxwell, and you're like, okay, now my feeling like I'm really, 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 really smart, I don't feel that way anymore. But that's a good feeling. That's something that you should take upon yourself, because trauma or criticism or failure is an extremely strong learning point. You say, okay, I'm going to compete with this person. If you're the fastest person in the room or the track or your class, and there's nobody to compete with, you're not going to be as strong as if you go and find your tribe and find people to talk to, find people to challenge you. And it's really important to collaborate and to use your corpus callosum to traverse that hard bundle. And I feel like I could talk about this for a long time, so I'm gonna pass it on to the next part of the panel, because I'm really excited about this. And when I get excited, I tend to go on and on. So
well, but that is fantastic, and it's nice that we get it on recording so people can listen to it over and over again, because the stuff that we already talked about is fantastic. If you like it, well, like it in the description down below. So we have a comment by Audio Video Tweaker, who says that the game theory on Bitcoin is unbelievably advanced and manifold. And he is, of course, absolutely right. And Niko, I know that you are a huge fan of game theory. We actually did a long video talking about the basics of game theory in Bitcoin, and we will continue that with a follow-up. So Niko, what do you think about the game theory of Bitcoin specifically, though, regarding education and how it incentivizes you, the user, to actually get educated about it?
Right. Game theory is one of my favorite parts, about maybe the favorite part of Bitcoin for me. And yeah, I just want to say, I can't tell you how reassuring it is to hear Jimmy Song say that he doesn't understand Bitcoin, because I don't think it is correct. Probably none of us understand it, but some understand better than others. And it is easy to be the king of fools, like Blake mentioned. And that's not what I want to do. I want to aim to be the most stupid person in the room or in the chat room. And I think I accomplished that here. And I do think the understanding Bitcoin is quite convoluted. You have these there's like 4 pillars of Bitcoin, and I think there's probably more than 4 actually. I think game theory is obviously a big one. Game theory, psychology, I would put those 2 together. Economics, you have to understand. You have to understand cryptography. You have to understand computer science, even maybe neuroscience. I don't know. Like there's it keeps expanding. Like it's devouring everything. So definitely hard to keep up. Just to keep up with the updates, it's quite difficult. But thank you for bringing some help on that. All the panelists here. I wanted to touch a little bit on the how to help. The game theory helps you to understand and to learn more, because I think the game theory part on Bitcoin is ingenious, because it harnesses human greed to do good. And if there's something you can, in my opinion, if there's something you can count on in this world, is that humans are greedy. They will hoard all the resources they can, because that's like a basic evolution biology, in my opinion, that we want to gather resources and we want to play the game so that we win. But what John Nash discovered, the Nash equilibrium, is that everybody can play the game optimally and win at the same time, which is I don't think that's been done in the same scale as Bitcoin has done it so far. So that's pretty amazing. I think that's if you understand the incentive models behind Bitcoin, I think that will incentivize learning, because I felt compelled. I didn't have a choice. I had to drop my job. I had to drop everything. I have to start learning about this because I didn't see any other way around it. It was so compelling once I understood what's in play here. And while I may not understand the technicalities, I certainly understand the incentives. And I think those are the key also in bringing this to the public and general public. Yeah, about the learning also, and also this goes to like pruning the code and everything. Like simplicity is everything. Writing is easy. Deleting the words that don't matter is the difficult part. So if you can do that, then you can have like really efficient ways to simplify things. And if you can simplify a very complex, convoluted thing so that 10-year-old or 5-year-old can understand it, that's genius. And that's, I think, where we should all try to strive to achieve that position. And that's all from me.
Great stuff. And you talked about greed, Niko, and Blake just sent a quote by Murray Rothbard, and I'm just going to read it because it fits perfectly here. So Rothbard is saying, I don't know what book he did that, but regardless, it's true. Greed has a very bad press. I frankly don't see anything wrong with greed. I think that the people who are always attacking greed would be more consistent with their position if they refused their next salary increase. I don't see even the most left-wing scholar in this country scornfully burning his salary check. In other words, greed simply means that you are trying to relieve the nature-given scarcity that man was born with. Greed will continue until the Garden of Eden arrives, when everything is superabundant and we don't have to worry about economics at all. We haven't, of course, reached that point yet. We haven't reached that point where everybody is burning his salary increases or salary jacks in general. So I agree with Rothbard here that we do live in a scarce world where the stuff that we have is limited. We do not have unlimited stuff. And so we have to economize, we have to ration who gets what, right? And this is economics, right? And of course, as Niko also said earlier, economics is a big part in Bitcoin. So Jimmy, my question to you is, how did you get to experience, how did you get to educate yourself in economics, and how did it advance your understanding of Bitcoin?
All right, so a lot of things to unpack in what you just said, but let's start with the Austrian stuff. I think 2008 was when I started looking into more of that stuff, just because of what had happened with the financial crisis and everything else. I'm like, wait, what are we doing? Why did these banks need so much money? And I don't really understand what's going on here. And that's where I started to educate myself. I started looking into just the writings that were there and what the different schools of economics were, and why they were different and what assumptions they made. Microeconomics made sense. Macro was where I started going, what? That doesn't make any sense, because I just learned about the broken window fallacy, and then you're doing broken window stuff, right? Like, I mean, it's just, okay, we just need to stir the economy. That's exactly the broken window fallacy. I don't understand what they're talking about. So I mean, a lot of that stuff was just, like common sense. I think it's just reading and figuring out what made sense to me. I remember there was a book by Hazlitt, I think, Economics in One Lesson. Pretty good. There were several other ones that were more libertarian in nature, and yeah, those were pretty influential. But mostly it's just reading articles and thinking through stuff that made a lot more sense to me. It's just, okay, what caused this crisis? Why are they printing money? And at that point, I don't think I really understood what money was and why it was so important. I now know a lot better, but back then I was just kind of like, and this is the experience I think of most people. It's just, well, money is money. You just use it to pay for stuff. It's kind of like a 5-year-old understanding of money. If you give them this, they'll give you stuff. But the more you think about it, analyze it, and really get to understand what it is, the more you realize, okay, money actually needs to be scarce. So one of the things that you said is that there is actual scarcity in the world. The thing that is really interesting in Safeteen's book, Bitcoin Standard, is that things may be like quote unquote scarce. The real scarcity, though, is in human effort. You can go and make more of almost anything, whether it be oil or gold or cars or whatever. You just need more human effort in creating those things. It's putting things together and making that work. That is the actual rare thing, which is why as the population of the world has increased, you've seen so much more prosperity, because you have a lot more human effort that you can expend towards these things that help people. But I will disagree with you with regard to greed, and Murray Rothbard in particular, about how he seems to think greed is an always good force. It can be a good force when you are motivated to provide goods and services for others so that you can, you can get more of the scarce resource. I think that's perfect, right? That's how the market economy is supposed to work. Greed is not so good, however, when it motivates people to go and print more of the money. And this is the real problem here, in not just in Bitcoin and altcoins or whatever, but also in the economy and fiat economy and everything else, is that greed causes people to want to be at the center of the money printing or the money gathering or whatever it is. They want to not provide any goods or services, but still get the wealth. And this is more or less what the entire ICO or altcoin phenomenon has been. It's people that want to print their own money. And somehow they've convinced a bunch of other people that they too can profit from this money printing, and they could be one of the first people to get to spend this newly printed money. It's, I mean, you guys know, this is the essence of how governments get to keep spending money that they don't have is through greed. So that, in that sense, I think greed is really bad, and it's led to a lot of these altcoins and ICOs that are really useless. They don't add anything to anyone. They don't have any utility. It's just people want to be at the center of money printing, and that's or early holder of a newly printed money or something like that. And in that sense, it's been very bad for Bitcoin because all of these other projects are taking things away. Imagine, the hundreds of thousands of people that have put their money and effort and talents towards promoting like crap like Ripple, right? Like if they instead were providing goods and services that people actually wanted in order to earn Bitcoin, Bitcoin would be a lot better off. So greed in that sense, I don't think is very good because it does sort of put you in a position where you are willing to compromise your ethics in order to get more of the monetary medium. So it still requires character in order to earn money the right way instead of the wrong way.
Oh, absolutely, Jimmy. I think Rothbard agrees with you here as well. I think in that specific context, he was talking about greed in the context of removing uneasiness, the basis of all human action, right? That we are in a perpetual state of uneasiness, and that we want to improve this state, that we want to go out there and live a better and more prosperous life. And if we are greedy for a better and more prosperous life, then the natural thing that we should do is follow natural law and trade and live and be peaceful, because that's praxeology basically. And you said that you started your education with the crash, right? The big crash, the housing bubble. And I met the fantastic filmmaker, Jimmy Morrison, so another Jimmy, and he made the amazing film called The Bubble Film. It's a two-part movie explaining first how the first crisis in 2007, who caused it, and who called it, who knew that this stuff was going on. And the second part is about the crash itself and the immediate political actions after the crash. This is an amazing movie. You can get it at letusdisagree.com/bubbles. The link is in the chat below. And this is a fantastic movie to get started in Austrian economics because it is really accessible. But it's also a nice movie to watch when you are already well-versed in Austrian economics because it still actually touches all the major and important stuff in monetary theory, and really nice packaged. So Blake, your thoughts on what has happened so far here in the discussion, and maybe small direction, talk about your education in Austrian economics a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point to point at the 2008 mortgage-backed securities and insurance crisis that really caused a lot of damage. I think that movies definitely are a great way to appeal to a very large common denominator. And one of those movies, in addition to what you're talking about, would be The Big Short. Somebody that doesn't know anything about anything, if they watch The Big Short, they can start to understand how much damage was done during the first bubble, and that was the housing bubble, quote unquote. And now we're kind of in an everything bubble. Our debt to GDP ratio is really skyrocketed. We're the global reserve currency. There are reasons to be concerned and to want a network like Bitcoin with network effect and security. And like it's a good thing to strengthen that net. Game theory and Austrian economics, I think, are really fun and important to talk about because they're almost like the base layer that represents Bitcoin, wherein it is a strong, very simple base layer that you can build entire cities on top of. And like Jimmy was talking about macro and micro econ, you get into these different schools of econ and you're like, where is the filter for some of this bullshit? Because not all of it can be true. Some of it's contradictory. And Austrian economics is basically a set of apodictic statements about reality that help you to filter out what's useful and what's not in other schools of economics. That being the case, it is almost like this base layer that helps you to vet what's going on in these layers on top of it. And game theory is another one of those types of things. And so I think that it's interesting to look at things through this way and to try to learn in that way. And I guess in 2008, when I started to realize how risky a lot of the stuff that was going on was, I tried to look at things from a computer science perspective, and I tried to really button down my world theory into complete ideological consistency. And basically what that looked like was, how do we program writes into a computer and not have it crash or have some type of severe memory leak and have it basically not work like shit? What you would have to do is you would have to have negative writes be completely supreme. You can't violate negative rights in the furtherance of positive ones, and then positive rights basically almost all but go away without consensus and voluntary support, so that people can actually provide those positive rights instead of saying, oh, somebody else is going to do it later. There's no need for me to engage in charity or to help my fellow man. And when you look at things like that, what it basically does is it starts to pen you into a very anarcho-capitalist worldview in terms of saying, let's use the market, which is a measuring tool that balances equations, to figure out how things should be priced, how much competition should go into things. And I think that it's an important part of understanding how valuable Bitcoin is to go through that thought process, to think very objectively, what rights can we have, what rights undermine those rights that are extremely precious, and then start to organize your worldview around that. It really helps you to understand what things are tenable in terms of news articles or policy decisions and what things you want to avoid. It has been one of the strongest influences in helping me to organize my own thought processes, to not only be consistent, but to be able to encourage and promote things that I believe in, and or call out bullshit and tell people to stay away from things that I see as predatory or dangerous. So I think that organizing your thought processes in a way that is logically oriented towards what can we accomplish, not just what do we want to accomplish, taking emotion out of it and saying, why and how do we get towards post-scarcity, what's going to make it so that human action is strongest, and let's try to move in that direction, because that's going to be best for the future. I think that having kids was one of the strong motivations in terms of me wanting to make the future better. I stopped trying to maybe virtue signal as much and started to try to, get down to brass tacks and say, what can we actually do on a material basis to make sure that the future is going to have good versions which are robust and there's enough to go around for everybody.
Yeah, fantastic. And this is, of course, the final part of the trivia. After we've gathered external information and internally understood it, now we need to act upon that understanding, upon that information, right? And if we do not act upon it, that basically means that we have information about something, we have understood it, right? So we know what the information is all about, but then we go out there and do something that is completely contrary to that understanding. So basically, I know, I get the information that if people die, that's generally bad. So I understand that I should follow natural law principle and not hurt anyone, right? And then if I go out there and kill other people, and then clearly I've shown that I did not understand natural law principle because I was not coherent in the trivium process. So Niko, how do you think can we actually go out there and do the stuff that we talk about, specifically regarding Bitcoin and Austrian economics?
Yeah, I really liked what Blake said about organizing your thoughts. And I agree that meditation is a key. I would call it meditation, organizing your thoughts. I personally do that many times a day. I try to do that at least. Of course, ideally, you don't have to try to meditate. You will just naturally meditate. And that's kind of like how you put things in order. If you fill your schedule with all kinds of things, you might not have time to internalize any of the information that you've learned. So be sure to take time to meditate. For me personally, it's been helpful to watch my diet, exercise. Once I'm off my diet and I don't exercise, I don't have the energy levels. I can't focus the way I can normally. So can't stress that enough. Another things I agree with Blake is the kids. Like, I have a son as well, and that had a huge impact on the whole game that I'm playing in this world. And also around the same time, I moved away from fiat. I got up at the top, and the broken window fallacy really got me personally as well, like Jimmy said earlier. And the economic system we live in is just like so unsustainable. And I can't believe that it eluded me for so many years. And the way I got into Austrian economics is actually through Bitcoin. I got into Bitcoin first. So then I started learning about Austrian economics through like mostly Max recommended a great deal of good reading. And I'm currently reading on Rothbard's Man, Economy and State, which is a giant of a book to devour, and certainly something very interesting, very difficult also for me to digest, but I would recommend that book nonetheless. And I wanted to a little bit talk about the incentivization with tokens that Jimmy mentioned earlier. I think that's funny that these projects have found a way to generate their own money. I mean, I would like to propose a game theory question for the panel. Like, if you would have a way to print non-scarce money to buy, to print non-scarce money to buy scarce money, then would you do that? Would that make a good game for you to play? And I think that's exactly what's happening with all these scammy ICOs. You print your own money, maybe you buy Bitcoin with it. And then that sounds like a sound game plan to me. Unfortunately, it's kind of stealing from the unsuspecting people who don't know any better, which is, of course, partly our responsibility to educate those people. Of course, their responsibility is to come and find us, but we can at least make ourselves available.
Yeah, good question, Niko. I'd like to add a little bit on there that I don't think we're talking about scarcity here, but rather rarity, because scarcity defines who can have ownership over the good, and something is scarce if only one person can have ownership over it, and something is not scarce if everyone can have ownership over the good. So, for example, if I have a piece of gold, I have full ownership of it. If I give it to Jimmy, I no longer have ownership, but Jimmy has. On the contrary, if I have a nice song that I proposed in my mind, I can sing that to myself, yes. But if I sing it to you guys as well, then not only do I still have ownership, quote unquote, on this original song, but you do as well. So more than one person can have ownership over the scarce good. So Niko, I think the question, although it is completely right on the technical term, we're talking about rarity. So what happens if a central bank or anyone who can print infinite amount of money and therefore making it not really rare, right? They can increase the money supply. And through the Cantillon effects, they still have the money early where it has a lot of purchasing power. And then with this high purchasing power, they can buy the rare currency like Bitcoin or gold, right? That is actually limited in its supply, and then decrease the purchasing power of their own money to buy the increasing purchasing power of the good money. Well, but as you see, there is a natural tendency towards a rapid decrease in value of the fiat currency that is being printed ad infinitum, and a rapid increase in the value of the currency, especially denominated in the fiat terms, of the sound money. So yes, central banks, in my opinion, will start really soon printing a lot of money to buy Bitcoin. But this will just further decrease the value of fiat and increase the value of Bitcoin. But Jimmy, what do you think about that?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. But yeah, I think generally people will are printing, the other money so they can get more of the sound, harder money. And this is, this is the big thing about Bitcoin, is that it is hard money. It is very difficult to produce. It's not easy money like fiat money. And that's more or less why why people work and create goods and services that other people want. It's weird though that a lot of people are going down this altcoin route and think that they're producing something just as good. I've gotten to participate in some of those involuntarily through hard forks, and that's been very educational, because if you got rid of them pretty much as soon as they came out, you made a killing, right? Like you got like 1 or 2% on each coin. But if you waited, then it took, like 90, most of them are down 95%. And they continue to go down because nobody wants them. And like you were mentioning earlier, like it's our job to educate people to not do that. Well, I'm not so sure about that. It's up to them to go and find it. If they're looking for people to tell them what to do, I certainly hope that I'm not that person, because I don't want to I don't want that responsibility. I'd rather you have that responsibility for yourself. The big question for a lot of people is, who's buying all this stuff, right? Like why did they exist? And who's actually like ponying up good Bitcoin? Who's on the other side of the trade? And it took a while, but I actually kind of figured it out. If you just do the math, you can figure out, at least on the hard forks, what's going on. So, for example, like one Bitcoin diamond is worth like, I don't know, like 0.3% of Bitcoin, right? Like, so one Bitcoin is worth like 300 Bitcoin diamond or something like that. I don't know the exact ratio at this point. It only takes 1 out of 300 people to be on the other side of the trade for that ratio to be stable. So if if you had just one person that said, "Oh, you know what? Like, I believe in Bitcoin Diamond. I think this is the next big thing. I will give up all my Bitcoin." They can service 300 times as many on the other side of the trade. And that's the real dynamic here, and that's the lesson here about like Bitcoin Cash, for example. Right now, it's trading at about 10 to 1. So you have one Bitcoin Cash believer for every 10 Bitcoin believer, and that's who's actually buying it up. And given, well, it's not like person to person; it's actually units of monetary units or whatever. So Jihan Wu, for example, is a massive whale, but he's on the Bitcoin Cash side. Last I heard, he owns a significant amount of Bitcoin Cash. And he traded a lot of his Bitcoin for it. So he's on the other side of the trade there. So it may not actually be very many people at all. It's just a few people that actually really believe in that product. And that's this is why altcoins and all these other things have at least some value. It's very hard to get 100% of the people to believe anything, right? Like in American politics, you could have issues like what color is the sky, and 90% will say blue, but there will be 10% that won't agree. Like it's extremely difficult to get unanimity on anything. But that also leads to altcoins having more value than they should, in a sense. But eventually, like, these things fall off. Hard forks in particular have fallen off very dramatically in the last 6 months or so, like 90%, 90, 95, 98% in certain cases. So and a couple of those networks have just completely gone away. No one's mining them. So we'll see where those go. But that to me tells us what we need to know about which one is considered actually hard money by most people.
Yeah, fantastic. I just want to remind you guys, 185 people watching, that we need to get to at least 100 likes. That is the official rule now. And Matt Bitcoin is the rule, so we have to follow it because he is kind of the son of Satoshi, or whatever. So please hit the like button if you like the content right here. And Jimmy, you talked about the competition in currency, and that is really, really important. That we now have a voluntary interaction of people, and they can just create a new currency out of thin air. And if people like it, they can voluntarily use it. So Blake, what are your thoughts on the competition in these currencies? And can they be manipulated so that you print money in order to get your hands on more Bitcoin?
It's very interesting, and it's everything that I'm going to say is going to kind of come across as really mean. So I'm going to try to temper it so it doesn't sound as mean.
That's exactly what we want to hear.
A fool and their money are soon parted, and people that don't understand what makes hard money or what makes for good development or good network effect, if they are conned into something else because they don't have the wherewithal to be able to support tenable development, their purchasing power and thereby their power to vote with their dollars or their bits goes down in aggregate. So, I mean, it might be bad for the individual, but it's arguably not so bad for the group if people that don't understand tenable morality have less voting power through market terms, because voting power for your representative, it's okay, you get a say. But voting power in terms of your dollars, especially if you're a whale or you're somebody that's really, really wealthy, if you own a lot of something and then the value of that is compromised to a pretty massive level, your ability and power to affect the future by voting with your dollars goes down. And that's kind of the self-balancing mechanism of the market. It's why the market is so valuable. It's not just some thing, this noise that people make with their mouth. It's the balancing effect of the equation of power and human action. That's why markets are so important. That's why people are called ANCAPs, because capitalism has the market as its central, balancing thing. So I don't like it when people get scammed. I don't like it when people don't do their research. It's not something that I'm a fan of, but at the same time, the market seems to know exactly what to do about that situation, and it takes voting power away from those people that straddle the wrong side of a fence for reasons of greed or short-sightedness or whatever it may be. So hopefully the people that have the prophetic ability to see down the road what is going to emulate the support of negative rights and what's going to support, classical liberalism, and then hopefully those people get more and more voting power. Again, the fact that I have kids makes me want to have a version of the future where those people have the most voting spending power, and I'm excited about that. So I am not excited about the individuals getting scammed or losing their money, but I am excited about competition making it so that certain things are illustrated in terms of their value. And yeah, I guess that's my not super efficient way of going through talking about that, trying to not be mean about it.
No, that's all right. It's nice to be a little mean sometimes. So Niko, you asked the question regarding printing money and buying Bitcoin with it. So would you like to answer that yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I would. Well, I mean, I'm not going to do that because I have morals and I have a soul, so I'm not going to print my own token and then buy Bitcoin with that. But absolutely, that makes logical sense to me if there's such a scenario that you can play. And same goes for the central banks. I mean, why not print some fiat money and then buy some sound money with that? That sounds like a great game plan to me. I wanted to go back a little bit about what Jimmy asked about who buys this stuff. I think this, I can defer to the Wolf of the Wall Street. They were talking about the pink slips there. And I think it's the same people, probably, the lesser educated population. And I don't think it's mean to say, it's just the way it is, like garbage men, plumbers. What else was mentioned there in that movie? Great movie, by the way, and pretty much tells the story of all the shitcoins and the ICOs pretty well, I think. Another thing about the Bcash and Bcashers, I think a lot of libertarians and anarchists are misled because they're so used to betting for the underdog, and Bcash is the underdog. And I'm sad to see that even some intelligent people that I've had conversations online with, that they are aligning themselves with Bcash because they are betting for the underdog clearly, and they are maybe a little bit misguided and maybe not so well educated on the topic, because otherwise they would see what it is. So for those people, I would just say to keep learning, and I think the light will be found.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And of course, one nice way to learn is to go to a seminar. And of course, we have here Jimmy Song with us, who of course has the Programming Blockchain seminar. So maybe Jimmy, to just further go into that topic, how do you teach such a complex subject as Bitcoin? So what methods do you use?
Well, this is a very deep question, obviously. Like it's about teaching methodology and stuff like that. Let me zoom out just a little bit. All right. So the main way that I try to utilize my teaching style is to make people work. And this is partly because I'm a little bit disillusioned with like university and formal education. I've been asked to teach this same class over a semester to a bunch of undergrads at the University of Texas, and I probably could. It's the same amount of material. What is kind of sad about that is that you need an entire semester to learn something that I can actually teach in 2 days. And the way that I can actually teach it in 2 days is by making you work. And that requires kind of motivated students, and they're very motivated because I charge a lot of money, right? Like they need to pay me some money in order to attend the class. And it's hilarious because I remember in college I would like not show up to a lot of classes and stuff like that. But you know, like I run my seminar. I always start at 8:30, and I try to get there early. I've never been the first one there. It's always like there's always like 2 or 3 people that are there like at, I don't know, 8 o'clock, 7:45 or whatever. Whenever I get in, there's always like people ready to go because they really want to learn, right? Because in part, I'm charging a lot of money, but also because they're really excited about Bitcoin and they're motivated students. And those are relatively easy to teach, you know? Like I feel sad for like all those like high school chemistry teachers like that, where the students don't want to learn any of that chemistry. It's you know, they're just sort of being force-fed education or whatever. But when you have motivated students, it's a lot easier. The general way I go about it is I'll teach some material. Then I will show an example of how to implement that material. So it's sort of like the theory, then the actual engineering, and then I will make them do it. And over the course of 2 days, you know, students basically have to create their own Bitcoin library from scratch, and that's not easy, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that you need to know in order to do that. And I start at the very basics. I start with the math. And I go through something called finite fields and elliptic curves. They sound intimidating, but once you know, you start learning them, it's like, oh, it's just like addition, subtraction, multiplication. You know, it breaks down into very fundamental stuff that you can actually understand and code. And by the end of the first day, you have a pretty good grasp. You have a library that can actually parse a transaction. And by the middle of the second day, you're sending transactions on your own, you know, that you've constructed with your library, you know, like, and I'm able to do that because I have motivated students. I have people that are like very open to learning. I make sure I screen them so that they have enough technical ability to be able to handle my class. And I make them do stuff over and over again, right? Like, and that's the way you get them trained. And this is how I'm able to fit in a semester's worth of information in 2 days. Like a lot of people are kind of like incredulous, but after they've taken it, they're like, wow, that was awesome. I actually got to learn all of this stuff. And, you know, in a way, it's kind of cheating, right? I think this was a Naval tweet not too long ago, you know, like reading and all this stuff. It's kind of like cheating because you're taking a person's life experience and they've condensed it for you, and you're able to gain from their experience what took them many years to take in a few hours of reading or whatever. That's more or less what I'm doing in my class. I mean, it took me years to learn all of this stuff. A lot of the, you know, actual technical stuff I learned from, you know, having to implement it and like doing it badly the first, second, third, fifth time, right? And then after having done it so often, and seeing other people fail too, I'm able to create something that, you know, leads them down the right path and helps them learn. And that's been my philosophy, and it works. And a lot of my students have found it very valuable, which is why like most of the people that end up coming to my class actually learn via word of mouth and things like that. And it's like, okay, well, and that helps me, that helps them, that helps the ecosystem, that helps the companies that they're working for. So, you know, this is one of the ways that I hope to continue to do this stuff, because I want to have other classes besides the one that I've been teaching. I want to have more people qualified to teach it and have that same vision of making Bitcoin better.
Yeah, really nice stuff. And like, it's kind of a similar question, but because education is such a personal topic and teaching is, if you were doing a Bitcoin seminar, maybe specifically targeted to programming, but doesn't have to be, how would you approach teaching it?
Well, the way that I approach teaching is almost in a very bizarre kind of a top-down way. I'll try to frame everything that we're going to talk about in the basic philosophy of where we're going, because when I learn things without having like some type of loose container to put the information in, it just kind of seems to diffuse out. So what I would talk about is the philosophy of why we're doing the things. Then I would do exactly what Jimmy is saying, which is to talk about what we're doing and then implement it, because learning by doing is so much more valuable than talking about the theory of widgets and the widget factory. And it's like, what is a widget? Why are we always talking about widgets? Actually applying what you know to something real is one of the best ways to learn. I worked as a project manager for a glass company, programming CNAC code through port listeners and through a point of sale system and through an inventory database, and learning how to do that as opposed to just like generalistic theory about widgets was so much more valuable, which is why a lot of people say, you know, college is great and everything, but if you can go and you can learn on somebody else's dime and make mistakes on somebody else's dime and then learn through doing, it's really, 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 really hyper valuable for you to be able to do that, instead of learning just generalistic theory that's hard to both digest and then also apply, being able to apply it directly. So I think that what Jimmy does is very, very valuable, and that he gives people the hands-on experience to work with exactly what he's told them about right after doing it. And then they get the ability to create these libraries and transactions with their own hands, with their own mind. They've actually done something with the information by the time they've left the class. I think that that is almost incontrovertibly the best way to teach people, because when it's just loose theory that doesn't, you know, anchor itself in a real world example, especially through doing, I don't think that it sticks. Like maybe you'll get 33% of the information to stick just by talking to somebody about something, and knowing 1/3 about something as finicky as computer science is not enough to actually be able to go out and make use of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Going half the way is almost worse than not starting all the way, because, you know, if you do not have a full understanding of the subject, well, you know, then why did you even bother starting with it? Because you didn't know anything before, and you still don't really know that much. So Niko, same question for you. How would you teach such a complex topic as Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because it is difficult to grasp, and I'm myself, I classify as generalist, so I know things from here and there that give me a kind of like a general grasp of the thing, and I understand the incentives and I understand the game theory. So that's where I normally start when I talk to people about Bitcoin and what it is and what you can accomplish with that. What does it mean to have this kind of protocol that you don't really need to know? Like, for example, the end user is never going to know how Bitcoin protocol works, never. Just like they don't know how TCP/IP protocol works. Why would they know? It's unnecessary information. What we need to do is come up with ways to develop a user interface for the regular people that is palatable and usable, and then focus on educating them on the ideology, and first and foremost to go into detail on what's wrong with the current system, because it's super hard to sell somebody on Bitcoin when they don't understand what's wrong with the money in their pocket. So I would really stress that one in terms of education. And of course, I highly respect Jimmy's course. I've been following it. It's super useful, and you're training the future coders. Obviously, that's super important. And where I can contribute value is to maybe try to onboard regular people who are not into coding, who are the kind of, let's say, this happy hoi polloi type of person who is happy to use Bitcoin if you can make a logical argument on why is it better than anything else available, why is the best game for international settlements, for example. And Max here is probably the best one in turning regular people into Bitcoin. And you can sell it to people once you know a little bit of the person. Maybe you have a chat first and you get to know them a little bit, what drives them, what motivates them. Maybe they're a family guy like myself. Maybe they want to also secure a future for their kids, which is a pretty logical and sound assumption to make, I would say. So yeah, I think you gotta think of people's incentives and their long-term goals as well, and see past this virtual signaling that we were talking about before, and social pressures, and don't like it's a lot of useless hot air going around in the Twitter sphere, for example, and all the politics and everything. That's like nonsense. That's non-usable, non-useful bickering over trivial subjects, when you could actually just do things, build things, and then save your wealth, and nobody can touch it, and then you will just build better and better products. I think that's the best way to sell it, I would say.
Oh yeah, I agree. I don't think that Bitcoin needs to be sold. It just needs to be shown to people. Because once they see it, they will pretty soon realize what a fantastic thing this is. So Jimmy, Blake talked about the intelligence of the people, and that some are really intelligent and really get the stuff quickly, and some need a bit more work, let's say, to understand something. So what would you say about your students? Are they super hyper intellectual and super smart, or just average guys? And do they need to be super smart?
Well, I mean, coding itself is kind of a weird industry, right? Like there's at least a minimum threshold of understanding abstract concepts that you need in order to be able to be productive as a coder. I've worked at lots and lots of different places. I think I counted once. I had something like 14 jobs before I got into Bitcoin, and I've had like I have like 6 businesses now. So there's, like it keeps multiplying and getting bigger. But I've worked with a lot of people, and there are certain ones that are very, very good. There are others that can't code for their lives, right? Can't code their way out of a paper bag. So, the thing that distinguishes them, I mean, there's definitely some sort of IQ or like intelligence component to it. You need to be able to think a certain way mathematically or whatever. But there's also what I would argue is even more important, a certain type of grit that you need in order to be able to like track down bugs or, just go at something until you actually solve the problem. Because there's a lot of, I've worked with, I used to live up in Boston. I've worked with tons of people that graduated with a CS degree from Harvard or MIT. Still can't code, right? Like they might not have the intellectual capacity in some way. Some of them, they just don't have the grit either, right? Like they just want to be lazy or do something else. Or the first thing that came to mind didn't work, and therefore whatever. So it's really difficult to assess how good a coder somebody is going to be, because there are certain qualities that you need in order to do it. Just like you need certain qualities to be a very good plumber or a mechanic or, I guess a manager or whatever. So it's hard to say if there's any particular pattern. I've had all sorts of people take my class. I've had people from 6 different continents, take my class. I've done it in 4, so that may explain part of it. But I've had kids as young as 14. I've had people that were clearly older than 70 or 80, take my class. And like a lot of them will, get a lot of it, right? Like get most of it. Nobody gets all of it, right? Like I'm just putting way too much information. And what I tell them at the beginning of my class is, the point isn't to get absolutely everything and understand everything perfectly. That's not the point of these 2 days. I want to build mental hooks for you so that when you think about, I don't know, a new opcode or something like that, you at least know enough to know what questions to ask. How many elements does that consume? What does it actually do to those elements? And what does it put back, right? Like those are 3 questions that you can ask about any new opcode that you wouldn't know to ask unless you actually understood how an opcode roughly worked, right? And that's the sort of thing that I'm trying to do, is not necessarily get them to understand absolutely everything about Bitcoin and turn them into Peter Woolley after 2 days. That's not going to happen. I just want them to have enough mental hooks so that by the time they're into their Bitcoin programming career, that they can actually go and look up the stuff that they don't know and can reasonably be expected to work well if they have the talent and drive to do it. For the most part, almost everyone I've taught has gotten at least that far, right? Like they have mental hooks now. You know, I have an alumni forum that I run, and they ask each other like interesting questions. I have one guy that was absolutely fascinated by signature algorithms. He started like you know, doing posts on, you know, the different types of signature algorithms. He wrote this article on BLS signatures that was absolutely awesome, because I didn't know what BLS signatures were and all of the advantages and disadvantages of that and things like that. That's awesome, right? Like that's the direction that I want my students to go in, and that's and you know, that's what I'm trying to create. It's not a bunch of Peter Woolley clones, although I would love to be able to do that. If I could clone Peter Woolley, I would, but I can't do that. And what I can do is to give them enough mental hooks, enough experience, so that they one, have some knowledge, but more importantly, two, have some confidence, right? Like they're like once they learn like you know, what a transaction looks like and how to parse it and stuff, then they start thinking, oh, okay, it's not that mysterious. It's just, you know, some hexadecimal. I can go parse this. And they you know, and then they see something similar with something else, and then they go, oh, well, okay. You know, there's like sort of this threshold at which you feel like you can take something on. When it's completely unknown, most people shy away from it out of fear. But when you know some, right, like when you know up to a particular threshold, and you know that threshold is different for everybody, but at a certain threshold, you feel like, okay, I can take this on, right? Like I don't know everything about this particular topic, but I can go and learn it, right? Like, and that's the place where you really want to put people, because that at that point, then they can go and you know, go learn whatever it is that they need to learn. You're giving them some base level of knowledge. You're giving them some level of confidence about what it is that they're going to need to do, because, you know, like by actually doing it, it turns out that they become more confident. It turns out if you ride the subway a few times, you get more confident in riding the subway, right? Like it's the same thing. And that's what I'm trying to do with my class, and that's worked pretty well, right? Like there's a lot of people that have come through. It's amazing how many people think that they can't do any of it, and then I'll just be like, okay, well, go take this class. There's a class called Python for Everyone. Go take that class. If you get through to the end, afterwards go to Project Euler and do 10 problems. If you can do that, then you can take my class. And I tell them that because I actually really believe that by the time if you can get through both of those things, you can actually go learn everything that you need to know. And you know, like I'm not doing anything different than what other people have figured out. Like boot camps more or less do the same thing, right? Like they teach people like enough of the basics and give them enough confidence that they can go out and actually do a lot of these jobs, except they charge a lot more money than I do. But yeah, I mean, that's the idea.
Okay, that is fantastic, Jimmy. So we had almost 200 people watching live and 91 likes already. Will we get the 100? You decide. So Blake, we talked about a lot of stuff already, and the question that I always ask myself is, how technical, how in-depth should we talk about Bitcoin? Should it be just high level? Should it be just the simple stuff that anyone will get without that much problem? Or should we jump into the nitty-gritty, into the, you know, really interesting stuff straight from the get-go? What do you say?
Well, I don't know. There's almost kind of a spectrum. Like there's Tone Vase all the way over to Jimmy Song. There's a World Crypto Network Bitcoin talk show to Block Digest. There's different levels of technological complexity that you can go and find information sources. It's very interesting to see how big audiences are for different things, what type of people gravitate towards what type of content. I think that it is interesting to have a spectrum. I think it's really important to onboard a lot of people, but I think that sometimes people forget that it's also really, really, really important to talk about the philosophy of science, of the technological changes that are being proposed or integrated into the code. So I have a lot of respect for like Jimmy and his topics, or Block Digest and their topics, where they are intentionally foregoing a lot of audience to make sure that they talk about things that are very, very dearly important. And I think that to not have that content where everybody is trying to make sure that they get as many views as possible would be extremely damaging to the ability of the community, so to speak, to achieve consensus about things. I think that it's extremely valuable to talk about in-depth technological topics, but also I don't think that people that don't have an extremely firm grasp on those things should necessarily go too deep, because they risk possibly steering people in the wrong direction. I like what Jimmy was talking about in terms of almost kind of communicating that he likes to teach maybe people how to think instead of what to think, to create these hooks that people can use later on when they are faced with various situations where they know how to think about what questions to ask, how to consider those questions, and how to move through their thought processes to get to a useful conclusion. So how in-depth should you talk about Bitcoin technologically? Pretty much as in-depth as you are capable of. Keep trying to break it down into the simplest terms that you can, but there's also a hierarchy of understanding that's required here, and you don't want to try to oversimplify things. You want to try to make things as simple as you possibly can without oversimplifying, because when you oversimplify things, it can make things difficult as well. I think Kira Robles was talking the other day about trying to simplify certain things to describe various different elements of Bitcoin, and maybe those work well for that one area of Bitcoin, but then they defy what really Bitcoin is in other areas. And so it's very, very difficult to break things down so that anybody can understand them when you're talking about Bitcoin. So I think that, again, it's really important that the thought competent in terms of the technological additions to Bitcoin really continue to talk about that, and hopefully they're not called away by the siren call of lots and lots of views by kind of appealing to a lower common denominator. And mad respect to the people that go out and publish content day after day that really is engaging the scientists in the community to think critically about what is the philosophy behind these changes, and is that a philosophy we want to integrate.
Yes, Niko, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well, especially, of course, both are important, but where do you think will we get more value out, whatever that means? Just what should be more of a focus? Is it the onboarding of complete no-coiners, or the education of newbies into Bitcoin and get them to a level of experts?
I definitely think that onboarding, I think my understanding of no coiner is somebody who actively opposes cryptocurrencies. So I would leave those guys alone, because if it's not a voluntary action if you start to convince them against their free will. However, there's I think the much larger population is people who just simply don't know. They don't know, and they don't care, and they don't know why they should care. So I do think that's where we should be tapping into in terms of like long-term sustainability, because guess what? Once you onboard those people, some of those people become coders, some of those people start learning on themselves. And yeah, it's not going to be, maybe it's going to be 10%, maybe it's going to be 20%. We don't know. Point is, I do think that this is by far the most efficient way to get new people and more knowledgeable people in the scene. Because there's a lot of smart people who don't understand, like even in Austrian economics, there's people who don't understand Bitcoin. It's hard to understand. So if we can get those people into the scene by basically outlining these attractive game theory scenarios and explaining how it can actually make our lives better through our own experiences and this kind of thing, I think the onboarding is really important. And we should cherish ignorance. Like, ignorance can be fixed by knowledge, and as long as you're willing to do a little bit of work, and understanding that you don't understand is more than most people can say, because there's a lot of virtue signaling going on, and maybe you are hanging out in a group, like I'm hanging out in the group and I'm just nodding, even though I'm processing monster trucks, because I don't really understand what you guys are talking about, but I want to appear knowledgeable, and I want to I don't think that's useful. I think you should just be honest and say, like, look, I don't know these things, but maybe I can learn. And that's I feel like that is a key, and it is a tough thing indeed. And I really like what Jimmy said about mental hooks. I think that's a great term. I use it personally for note taking. For example, I use these like quick links. I call them like just a couple words on certain things, or maybe even one word. And once I look at that one word, it will take me back in the long-term storage of my brain to open up the train of thought I had at that moment when I wrote that word down. So I think that's kind of like a similar thing with the mental hooks that you can plant on people and these ideas. And a great idea is so infectious that once you implant the idea, it will just do all the work for you. And that's all we got. All we got to do, like plant these infectious ideas. And I think we're going to do well.
Oh yeah, fantastic. So by the way, guys, we did crack the 100 likes, so that is amazing. I would say next goal is 200 likes. But as Gestner, I hope I pronounced his name right correctly, says in the chat that we do not have 200 viewers, so we can't really get 200 likes. Well, I challenge that. Let's try that. Let's get to 200 likes without crossing the 200 viewer mark. So if we get close to there, you should drop off and stop listening. Kind of a gamble. So Jimmy, we already talked about so much, but maybe as a two-sided, two-folded questions. What is your expectations of the students, and do they usually fulfill it? And on the other hand, what are the expectations of the students, and are their expectations met after the seminar?
Well, I can't speak to the students' mindset or what they're expecting. That's something that you would have to ask them. But my expectation is that they get through the class. Like I said, it's a fire hose of information. So if they can survive, then that's pretty good. I have two major checkpoints in my class. The first is after the second session, like the very last exercise of the second session is creating a testnet address with their own secret. That's a major checkpoint. And then the second checkpoint is after session 5, which is the first session in the first session of the second day, they need to spend some Bitcoin testnet Bitcoins that I've sent them back to me. And that's creating a transaction from scratch. It's not easy. You have to know a lot of stuff in order to be able to do it, but almost all of my students end up doing it. I even have a bonus one there where I make them go to a testnet faucet and then send me those testnet coins and stuff like that. I'm working on a third checkpoint, which would be actually grabbing the UTXOs from the network and transmitting the testnet transaction through the testnet network and doing a bunch of stuff like that. So that would be like node level stuff. That's something that I want to be able to do. And most of my students manage to do all of those things. There's been an odd duck here and there that, got sick after the first day or something like that, or got food poisoning or couldn't make it because of a flight, but most of my students get through that, and they're able to do it. And usually, like, if they send a testnet transaction, they feel really good. They're like, okay, I actually can make transactions on my own, and it wasn't too difficult, and I understand all of the stuff that's involved in it. That tends to be a major accomplishment for them and helps them to gain that confidence that I was talking about. But yeah, most of my students do fulfill my expectations. Afterwards, a lot of them end up going to work at a lot of these Bitcoin companies. I have former students at Blockstream, BitGo, Purse, pretty much any company. They probably have at least one alumni from my course in there. So, I think that's a pretty good track record.
Oh yeah, that really is fantastic. And getting more developers out there is super, super needed. Absolutely. So Blake, you talked in the chat a bit about the hierarchy of understanding. So that sounds interesting. Could you please elaborate on that?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people that talk about anarchy and stuff like that think that there's no hierarchical element to it at all. But a market will definitely have hierarchies of just competence, and there's hierarchies of understanding that are required to do certain things. Like in an anarcho-capitalist society, like a brain surgeon wouldn't have the same amount of experience and reputation as somebody that's like a plumber or something like that. And a plumber wouldn't have the same amount of experience or reputation as maybe say a gardener or somebody that's not going to flood your house if they make a mistake. So the hierarchy of just competence and the hierarchy of understanding, it's important to look at hierarchies and reputation in terms of how do we organize society without central planning, without the FDA or the CDC or these different agencies which are going to regulate action. And this kind of gets off topic of education a little bit, but I think that it's important for education in terms of understanding that we have a decentralized global network of value transfer. We're going to have some type of governance structure, and I think that an individualistic governance structure or an anarcho-capitalist governance structure will make the most sense. There's not jurisdictions where we can use force, so we're going to actually have to do things voluntarily, and hierarchies of just competence will help with that. Regulation through centralized means has not been very effective in the past. It's actually arguably the mechanism by which empires and collectivist states fail. When a market is regulated, the first things bought and sold in that market are the regulators, who then turn around and engage in capture to not assist their constituents, but to actually take money from the people that they were hired to regulate and then take advantage of their constituents by taking bribes, passing new regulations, which make it so that their competition in terms of the businesses that work with them get crushed out, and then there's less competition, there's less advantages for consumers. And we need to be aware of all of that stuff when we think about Bitcoin and how we're going to scale out the system, how we're going to reach consensus, and how we're going to communicate. I think that what we're doing with these shows, voluntarily giving people the information and the tools that they need for free, is a great step in the direction of this is voluntary, consensus aimed educational content, and that is a good way to think of how you're going to organize something that's on a global scale where you don't have the lazy shortcut of violence in specific jurisdictions through which to do that.
Well, yeah, I agree that there's, of course, always a asymmetry, right? We have one person that is already the vice master, right, that knows the stuff. And then we have the student who is, the uninitiated and who does not know all the stuff. So, Niko, how do you, of course, because there is such a hierarchy that can be misused. So how do we make sure that the teacher does not misuse the student?
Misuse the student? How do you mean?
Well, that he, for example, because there's always this level of trust between the student and the teacher, then that he does not misuse this trust and propagate wrong information, for example, or just any other way that you can misuse the trust.
Well, that's a tough question, and of course, having gone through the public education system myself and university as well, it became evident to me that a lot of teachers are driven by maybe ulterior motives than just educating people. So I would defer at this point to the student's personal responsibility to find trustworthy mentors. And internet is a great tool to help with that. But of course, it can be tricky if you trust somebody and then they give you false information. It's up to you to verify that information and not trust it, no matter who is saying that. And I think peer review, like open source projects, I love open source projects. So that alone for me is kind of a guarantee that I can trust it, because I know there's enough eye pairs to check it out and vet it, and then I can through proxy I can trust it. But yeah, it's a difficult question. I don't really have a definite answer for that.
Okay, we again talked about a lot, so maybe to put the finishing touches on this, Jimmy, back to you. Where do you see the most interesting advancements in Bitcoin specifically, and where do you think should the people get educated next?
Well, I mean, Lightning is becoming a thing, and a lot of people are using it. So I see that as a giant growth edge for Bitcoin. But there's a lot of other things, and it's really hard to predict. I try to stay away from technical predictions. There were people that were saying the segways would, change cities and stuff 15, 20 years ago. Didn't really happen, right? Like it's mostly used by mall cops, and that's it. So it's hard to say, right? Like, is it going to be the next Segway, or is it going to be the next cell phone? And each technological advance in Bitcoin, you sort of have to ask that question: is Lightning Network or side chains or Graphroot or confidential transactions, or I mean, there's just so much stuff going on. It's hard to know how the market will respond, or what products or services people will build on this stuff. Something relatively minor might end up allowing for some really cool killer app, which then becomes more and more popular and becomes like a major use case for Bitcoin and so on. So it's hard to say. I will say, though, that store of value, like being able to preserve saleability across time and keeping your wealth instead of having it confiscated or inflated away from you, is going to be a major part of Bitcoin going forward. And that's the part, for me, that's where I think most people, if they are in Bitcoin, should be focused. Like, every institution wants good custody solutions, for example. That's because security is important for store of value. If you have a bar of gold, you're going to care a lot about where that thing is stored, right? Like, whether if you bury it in your backyard, then somebody might take it. If you keep it in a safe, somebody might take it. Somebody might crack it. If you keep it in a vault, then they might lend it out. These are things that you are going to have to think about when you have a store of value. So I see that as the biggest growth vector for Bitcoin going forward, and hopefully that means that more entrepreneurs will come in and solve problems for people. Always tell people, like, if you like ICOs, altcoins, all of these guys have it backwards. They are solutions looking for a problem. What you want to be as an entrepreneur is you want to look for problems that people have, and then come up with a good solution that makes sense for all of their needs. And if you do that right, that's the recipe to making a lot of money. And the nice thing about sound money is that it incentivizes more people to go and do that instead of the other thing, which is, printing money, or being a rent seeker, or having a meaningless existence as a government bureaucrat or HR person or something like that. I would like to see more people creating businesses that benefit people, through goods and services. You should make money. You totally deserve to if you provide a good service. But yeah, it takes a certain mentality that's missing in a lot of people when they're under a fiat system, but become more of a reality when you're under a hard money system like we have in Bitcoin. That to me is the most exciting part.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The businesses that will spring up and the entrepreneurs that will use this sound money as an economic tool of calculating prices and allocating resources. The amount of innovation and prosperity that is going to come out of that is insane, especially because we had more than 100 years of centralized fiat money with high inflation, probably longer if you count all the government meddling in currency. It's crazy. It really is. And Bitcoin will bring to light all those malinvestments and take away the resources from those bad investments and put it into good investments. And if you continue doing that, eventually you're going to have a damn prosperous world. Absolutely. So maybe Blake, you two, again, about the new stuff that is coming to Bitcoin. Of course, it is always hard and difficult to predict that stuff. But you specifically, where do you educate yourself, and what is your point of focus and interest right now?
Well, a great source of information is Bitcoin Tech Talk. I think issue 95 just came out, so I want to give a shout out to Bitcoin Tech Talk. That's good. It's a great place to learn stuff. But I actually want to weasel out of this question and try to qualify what Jimmy said, because I think he made a really good point. It's very hard to make predictions about technology. And one of the things that I run into when you talk about libertarianism in Austria and economics and stuff to people, they say that's an oversimplified thing. And it's like an oversimplified thing. It's not really an argument. It's not really a criticism, because when you look for what's going to be the new killer technology ad, there are things to look out for, things like scope creep and scope bloat and promising too many features. One of the reasons that I was so skeptical of Ethereum at the beginning, being a world computer, is that sounds like an extremely huge attack vector. Like a surface area, attack surface area seems really, really big on it. And it seems like you're going to be going off in so many directions that the odds that people are going to program in the same direction and or not have redundant work that's going to not only be redundant in terms of more than one person is doing the same thing, then how do you merge those two sets of work if they're implemented differently? So basically, whatever is a very, very simple and elegant ground up solution to a real problem, those are probably going to be some of the biggest innovations in the future. And what I would look out for as somebody who maybe doesn't understand computer science and technology very much is look out for grandiose promises that are going to deliver the entire world all at once, and that are going to have all these cool features, like a huge fun park laid out in this white paper that's so long that you can't understand any of it. Look out for that. That's poison in terms of a technological development. You want simple solutions that can iterate and that can be layered out. You don't want a base layer with all this complicated, peripheral features that are baked in at a fundamental level. That's probably not going to be good. So I would say that my hooks for trying to identify the new big thing is look for simplicity, look for simple solutions. Don't go all out advertising a solution because it's like a wet dream and it's really, really exciting, because there's all these bells and whistles that can end up getting you in trouble, I think.
Very true. That it's hard, pretty much impossible to predict the future. But nevertheless, as entrepreneurs, we work in an environment of an uncertain future, and we always have to allocate resources, especially, of course, our time, the most scarce and rare resource that we have. So, Niko, in the coming days, and weeks and months, where will you allocate your time?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm going to keep making more videos and educating people. I think this is very important work that we're doing here. And I would agree with Blake that if somebody promises you free money, chances are they're not up to no good. So I like to prepare for the worst. I like to make a certain thing that I can deal with the absolute worst case scenario, and then I can proceed. So that's kind of like the mindset that as an entrepreneur, an open source entrepreneur, I have. I'm not afraid to fail. I've failed many times, and that's a learning experience. So I think you should always prepare for the worst and hope for the best. For me, Bitcoin represents freedom, power, leverage, whatever you wanna call it in the future, especially. And I'm personally super excited to see the world, where the world is going to go, where power is more distributed towards the better educated portion of the population. Yeah, and if you're watching this stream, the chances are that you are already part of the global intellectual elite. So it is your responsibility to breed the future leaders. So go get some children and educate them, I would say. I mean, each individual represents an unbroken chain of evolution, and it would be a shame to break it.
Yes, absolutely. So guys, we have talked about a lot, and of course, mainly about education and Bitcoin, but that is such a huge topic that we covered a bunch of stuff. So Jimmy, just to summarize, what do you want to finish up this conversation? Anything that you want to highlight? Anything that was unique in this conversation?
I mean, we covered a lot. It's always hard to sum up everything that you've talked about over a past hour. But yeah, Austrian economics, like being your own bank and being the master of your own mind, and not being force-fed stuff and going towards curiosity. I think those are all pretty interesting topics to me. And how to actually educate people in a way that makes sense to them, and that help them and continue to create more developers for the ecosystem, create more holders for the economic aspect and so on. So yeah, I enjoyed this conversation. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do it again.
Perfect, Jimmy. Thank you very much. And where can the people find you? How can they reach out? And what about the seminar?
Yeah, so you can go to programmingblockchain.com and register for the seminar. There's an application with a coding question. I screen people as a way to make sure that they're qualified. The next one is in Chicago, August 21st and 22nd. I am also going to be doing a bunch of other stuff that week, including going to Voice of Blockchain to speak. If you are out in Chicago at that time, it would be great to have you there. I'm also hosting a carnivory dinner August 24th. That itself should be a lot of fun. And, I have a free gift for, well, not a free gift because you have to pay for the actual dinner. But I have a gift for you if you do show up at the carnivory dinner that I think you'll like. A lot of people, yeah, I mean, there are more seminars coming. I have one in Prague. I'm working on a self-paced online one, but in the meantime, you can register for the Chicago one and just take it online. So you'll be more or less in the classroom. I'll just be streaming directly to you via Zoom, and you'll get all of the lectures. You'll be able to ask all of the questions. You'll do all of the exercises and have the more or less the classroom experience from the comfort of your own home. So I'm going to experiment with that. If you are interested, please indicate on the application. You can find me on Twitter, Medium, GitHub, Jimmy Song. And I'm on a lot of different YouTube shows, and I've been producing a lot more, shorter content as a way to, I don't know, that it just works better for my schedule and stuff. Instead of doing like a 2-hour show or something like that, I can knock out like 5-minute videos in like a half hour or an hour or something like that. So got a lot of different, I could keep shilling, man. I have like I do hard forks for people. Like I'm a VC at Blockchain Capital. I do consulting. I've even done my seminars for private companies because, they're like, oh, we got a bunch of engineers that don't know what the hell they're doing with this stuff. Can you train them? So, I do that too. I just, if you have ideas, might not be a bad idea just to contact me and see if I'm interested. At worst, I'll just say no, and that'll be it. But maybe there's, I mean, I like having an anti-fragile life where, any one of my 7 or 8 things that I'm doing go away, I don't really care, right? Like if people stop inviting me to go speak at conferences or something, I'm okay with that. I mean, it wouldn't be like the most happy thing in the world, but like it's okay, right? Like, but I'm not beholden to any one of these things. So that's one of the nice things that you discover when you start going out on your own and I don't know, taking responsibility for your success instead of hitching a ride on someone else.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And so, Blake, now the microphone back to you. What are some points that you want to elaborate on from the long discussion that we had?
Well, I think that what we were talking about, what Niko said about meditation and about focusing in on your own life and changing yourself and bettering yourself is a great way to contribute to the world at large. Get yourself in order, and then you're going to be able to help have order outwardly. And I actually want to thank Jimmy Song from the bottom of my heart. A while ago, we were talking about Jordan Peterson, and Jimmy was kind enough to send me the free copy that he got of the Future Authoring Program. And so I wrote autobiographically about my past, present, and future. And that changed my life probably more than anything else ever has. Since I've done that, I've become a teetotaler. I've had another child. My life is way, way better. I've gained muscle weight. Basically, every single aspect and facet of my life is better because I spent time looking at myself, looking inward, not necessarily just meditating, but also writing down, traversing the corpus callosum, and thinking about how do I want to be, how do I want to affect the world, what is the best way for me to live my life. So again, thank you to Jimmy from the bottom of my heart. That was really thoughtful of you doing that. It's had a profound impact on my life. And
well, you kind of introduced me to Jordan Peterson. So I took the authoring program. They had a 2-for-1. I had an extra one, so I gave it to you. But yeah, I looking back, that was actually like a really big seminal experience for me too. It's a lot of work, and I actually didn't finish. There was like I think I did like past and present. I did some of the future or something like that, but not. I didn't quite finish it, but it had a major impact. It led me to actually starting my own business and going off on my own instead of being beholden to others and like with golden handcuffs or whatever. But a large part of it is just setting your goals, right? Like having goals themselves, it's kind of a driver. And one of the goals that I had, I think when I took that program was I want to be invited to speak at a conference and I want to speak. And oh my goodness, whatever it was in having that goal, all of your thoughts and actions sort of have this tendency to align towards those goals, right? When you have that, and for me, okay, well, these 7 places are asking me to speak. Okay, all right, I'm gonna do it. I should probably go through it again and like have new goals because a lot of them I've like accomplished. Like speaking at a conference. I think one of the other one was visit the 6 major continents. I have done 4 this year, which is crazy though, and I've done Australia before in my life, so I really only have Africa to go. So once I visited Africa, then that one's knocked off the list, right? Like I've got a bunch of others. I got to go look at what they were just so I can like check them off or something. But having that kind of goal in mind helps you to recognize what's important and what's not important. And this is something that I think you alluded to with your teetotalism. But yeah, like just, perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. There's a lot of stuff that you could take away from your life that will benefit you tremendously, like whether it is sugar or TV or Facebook or, toxic friends or people that you don't really need to associate with or activities that you don't really need to spend time doing. And if you can identify those things and actually cut them out because they're not adding anything to your life, you actually gain way more than if you add an extra thing like, I don't know, whatever it is. I'm going to exercise 30 minutes a day or whatever. I mean, those things are important, but you don't really have room for them if your life's already kind of full. So perfection is achieved when there's nothing left to take away. So like when you're living a life where everything is meaningful, that's where you want to be. And that future authoring program definitely helped me get to that state. Totally recommend it, along with Jordan Peterson's new book, 12 Rules for Life. Very, very good book. It goes through just very practical wisdom. And wisdom, if you think of it in ancient terms, is being skilled at life. That's what that book helps you do. So I want to give another shout out to that and Jordan Peterson, period.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And meditation is really, really nice because, it is the study, the art of being present in the moment, in the here and now. And if you are present in the here and now, it is amazing what you can accomplish. If you don't have your mind racing back in the past and forward in the future, which are both just non-existing. All that there is here and now. And if you focus on that, it's crazy what you can do.
I like what Eric Thomas says. He says, don't let the distractions distract you, which is so simple, but also so meaningful. And it's like what Jimmy said, take away those things that are distracting you, that are taking up your time. And then you'll naturally have time for more exercise or more time for your family or more time for writing and for researching. So the age of information, especially, don't let the distractions distract you.
Absolutely. And Blake, where can the people find out more about your stuff and what are you working on?
You can find me at Bitcoin Blake on Twitter. Today I'm working on, in just under an hour, I'm going to be having a discussion with Chris DeRose about anarchy, the definition of anarchy, a little bit about Bitcoin Core not being Bitcoin, the difference between the protocol and implementations, and trying to set straight some things for the community. And hopefully that will be a productive talk. I think it'll either be really, really, really awesome, or it'll be like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, unable to agree on the definition of truth, and we won't get very far. So hopefully it'll be somewhere in the middle of those two things, but I guess that's what I'm working on for today anyway.
Oh, that is fantastic. I'm absolutely going to check that video out. Yes. So Niko, anything that you want to point out of that discussion and finish up with where the people can find you?
Of course, yeah. Such a pleasure, guys. Really illuminating. I learned so much from you, and I really appreciate the chance to also share my views. And about meditation, one more time, like I can't stress how important that is. If you don't have time to meditate 20 minutes every day, then you should meditate 1 hour instead, I think. Because then, you have a lot of things you can take away from your life. Like I really like what Jimmy said about that. Prune your life as simple as possible, and then, that's the perfection. That's another thing I wanted to talk about is being lazy. I'm a super lazy person, but what I want to point out is that being goal-oriented and lazy is actually super efficient. I guarantee you that the guy who invented the wheel was a lazy bastard. He was trying to get a load of things from place A to B much the most efficient way possible, and he was lazy enough. He had a goal and he achieved that goal. We should try to be that guy. Yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter. You can find me on Omnifin, double N at the end, like a Finnish person who can do a lot of things. And I'm doing a lot of things. I'm the chairman of Finnish Cryptocurrency Association Consensus, doing a weekly talk show, mainly in Finnish, but lately I've been doing a lot of shows in English. Like just today, we did one with Max and the head of digitalization of Bank of Finland, Aleksi Grimm, who did the hit piece of how digital currencies are an illusion, and how Bitcoin is digital sand, essentially. So I advise you guys to check that out. And we'll be doing more shows also with Max and the World Crypto Network. I have a personal channel called Maximal Liberty, where we try to do a little bit like this pre-shot, edited, long panels about important topics like sound money, game theory, those kind of things. I'm working on several open source projects like NX Solar, WeEconomy. We're trying to build products on top of Bitcoin blockchain, and WeEconomy is trying to create a user-friendly interface for Bitcoin for regular people. And NX Solar is about tokenizing ownership of solar power plants and basically bringing that available for everybody. And I think that's about it for my shelves. Oh yeah, I do have a t-shirt shop, moneybadger.shop. If you want to check some Bitcoin maximalist t-shirts, and that's where you find those. Anyway, it was a great pleasure.
Quick note on your laziness thing that I wanted to point out. Larry Wall, he's the creator of the Perl programming language. He used to say that there's 3 great virtues of a programmer: laziness, impatience, and hubris. Always found that really interesting, because it's laziness that causes programmers to write programs because they don't want to do it manually. It's impatience that causes programmers to write lots of programs that are very anticipatory of what the user wants because they don't like the computer being lazy. And hubris, because that lets you think that you can actually do something about it when in fact it's actually a very hairy and thorny problem. So maybe that also applies to your industry. Something to think about.
Oh yeah, guys, it was a fantastic conversation. So much for Blake, who unfortunately already had to drop off. Thank you so much for Jimmy for dropping by and talking about his stuff. And of course, thank you to Niko for also joining the panel. It was really fun talking to you guys. And the chat is going crazy about Bitcoin carnivore and veganism. And I think that might be a conversation for the next time, Jimmy, because I know you are a pretty big Bitcoin maximalist carnivore, and I am a Bitcoin maximalist vegan.
Well, then we're going to have some words here. Yeah, August 24th, carnivore dinner in Chicago. It's going to be Brazilian barbecue. So Yeah, just wanted to show that one more time.
So yeah, if you're up for that, it would be nice to debate whether.
Yeah, it would also be interesting because I was vegetarian for like 20 years, so we could talk about that too.
Oh yes, absolutely. Okay, so I see much more content to come, hopefully, and it was a great show so far. You can find out more about myself on my personal website, towardsliberty.com, especially my paper regarding anarchy and money and why we neither need nor want government intervention in Bitcoin. You can find that at towardsliberty.com/anarchy. What else is there to show? Well, a bunch of stuff coming to you this week on the World Crypto Network. We got an interview with Ansel Lindner coming up. We got an interview with Giacomo Succo and whoever else we're going to finish in this week. So that's going to be amazing talking to all those guys. So stay tuned. There's also a bunch of other stuff coming. We might have the WCN insatiateness talk with Niko, when maybe. Let's see how that goes. And yeah, it's been an absolute honor to talk to you, and see you on the next show. Bye bye.